Can you hear me, Jack?
Hi, Dwayne.
How are you?
Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing. We need 1,000 tongues to do that song right. My great Redeemer's praise. We need 1,000 tongues. So we got 2 more here, and we got 1 person with 2 tongues. One coming out their mouth, one and the other coming out their ear. I don't get much laugh these days. Well, look, we're going to start right now. And I'm happy to see you on. Gregory Campbell's on here. Well, what do you think? All right. We got on the convention center or the conference center. We got a couple. And some more over here on Zoom. I'm going to shut the door because there's a lot of noise out here. Noisy people. Well, my intention is to do some Dead Sea Scrolls, some pretty stuff that deals with the actual texts. Are you coming in here?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't bring the martinis?
Not today.
Why not?
This is a dry county today.
Oh, okay. No martinis. New Testament characters in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take some of this from Palumbo. Might be a scholar you've never heard of, but he's does a pretty thorough job of the topic, and the name of his book, which I've got before me, it's not well known at all, but it's really got lots of resources in it. It's called The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Personages of Earliest Christianity. And I want to do some chapters out of here because some are really good. They deal with the Dead Sea Scrolls text. That's something we haven't done much of except in introductory form, or Ornia's Gregustums on the Dead Sea Scrolls. But now we want to kind of direct ourselves to New Testament times. There are many scholars and students of the Dead Sea Scrolls that would say that this has nothing to do with the first century or Christianity at all. Has nothing whatsoever to do. In fact, this stuff was written hundreds of years before Messiah ever came, or the Jesus movement in the first century, hundreds of years before. And they are likely to try to ferret out some kind of coincidences between the history of the 2nd century BC and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they can never come up with anything except innuendo and just very sketchy, very vague kind of identifications with some exceptions, like Michael Wise. Now, we have done the Teacher of Righteousness 3-4 times now with different theories about who that is. This time, the theory goes right to John the Baptist, and that's why we're going to start with John the Baptist tonight with some pretty obscure texts on John the Baptist. And I will talk about that text in a minute, but first of all, I would like to direct you to a couple links. I'm going to give it to you on the chat. So if you want to go to this particular text, there's a couple links there to some of these, to actually two resources there. Paste. So what we're going to find there is the famous Farrah Fawcett poster that sold 20 million copies in 1976, more copies than have ever been sold of a poster before. And if you weren't there at that time, then you probably don't want to look at this particular poster. You know what I'm talking about? Farrah
Yes,
Fawcett,
of
1976?
The hair.
Oh my gosh. The hair, the bathing suit. Nothing. It's not risque at all today. No. There's no link to Farrah Fawcett. We were just talking about that before getting on here. Let me see. One thing I sure don't like about Zoom is it makes my little toolbar pop out all the time, and I have to go to the dang thing to get it to stop. Now, we need remedies for these things. You're not seeing any links at that? Maybe I put the wrong thing in. No, it's there. A PDF comes up, and you've got excerpts from the Slavonic Josephus and excerpts from the Damascus document exhortation with a checkoff list. And what you're going to want to do first, if you want to follow along, is click on the Slavonic Josephus text PDF. Let me tell you a little bit about that, since I got a little time to fill here. Josephus wrote The Jewish Wars and The Antiquities of the Jews, and another one, Vita, V-I-T-A, which means life. It's a way of saying my life. It's an autobiography. Those three texts. He wrote a fourth against Appian. Appian was a pagan who was against Judaism, and Josephus was the apologist for Judaism to Appian, this heathen. I haven't read that. I read the other ones extensively. Well, look, when Josephus wrote the war, sometime soon after 70 AD, when the war ended in 73. The war was 7 years, 66 to 73. Those are the 7 years that are spoken about in Revelation. The Revelation is a mirror image of the Jewish war, Josephus' text. What survives to us is a Greek version. And it's got a few holes in it, but it's pretty complete. However, Josephus tells us that before he wrote the Greek translation, he wrote the story of the Jewish war in Aramaic. And why? Because he wanted to get the story out of what was happening in Jerusalem in 70 AD. I hope I don't have to explain that, to the barbarians. The barbarians meaning those Jews in the dispersion, especially those beyond the Euphrates River. So he wanted to get the word out. He wrote it in Aramaic. Then he wrote a later version in Greek. The thing about the Aramaic version, it disappeared. Don't know where any of it is, but if he wrote the Aramaic version to Aramaic speakers, certainly it's going to tell different things to Aramaic speakers than to Greek speakers and Latin speakers. It's going to tell a different story. Now, I have a theory. I checked this out with a couple top scholars, and they liked the theory. In about 1000 AD, these two brothers, Methodius and Kirill. I hope I get this right. They were Greek Orthodox missionaries who were experts in Aramaic language. They were sent from the Greek Orthodox Church up to Moravia. Moravia, we would know that is like part of the Czech Republic, Slovenia, Slovakia, those little places in there, Moravia. You might have remembered Jan Hus came from Moravia, was burned at the stake in about the 15th century, I think, a proto-Protestant that really got the Reformation started 200 years before it started in earnest. But in Moravia, what was happening was that the Roman Catholic Church from Rome had come in and made huge inroads into this, what had been a very Orthodox land. Remember, we've got two Christian churches mainly at this time in a thousand. We've got the Roman Catholic Church, and we got the Greek and the other Orthodox churches, Greek, Syrian, Serbian, Russian, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and we've got the Orthodox Church of the Presumptuous Assumption of the Guiding Light, Polish Ukrainian Church, the one that Brother Frumkov is involved in with his Pastor Creamley. So the Orthodox churches, they sent Kirill and Methodius up to Prague, and they sent with Kirill and Methodius some texts to translate. Well, they get up there and find out that in Moravia they had no alphabet. They didn't have a written language. So Kirill, he devises a written language. It's called Cyrillic. Cyrillic, or Cyrillic, as they pronounce it today. That's pretty much the same alphabet today as it was 1,000 years ago in Russia and Ukraine and let's see, that other Russia that's right beside Romania. I can't think of the name of it right now. Belarus. There it is, Belarus. So you've seen the letters of the Cyrillic alphabet. Well, those were devised by Kirill and Methodius, I don't know, around 1000 AD. They take with them stacks of Aramaic texts, and they translate them up there, as well as translating a Bible once they put together a language that the people there can read. And they teach them this language, and they take with them what was an extent at that time, an Aramaic version of Josephus' Wars. And they translate that into what becomes Old Russian or Slovenian. Slovenian? Slovenian. Some reason my mind is not. Slavonic. Okay, same thing. I was thinking Slovenian because when I was a teenager, I used to watch after church every Sunday. I watched polka varieties. You know, on TV, they'd have a polka band and they'd have dancing and everything. I watched these guys on TV, and they'd always have the Slovenian polka groups. Oh, they were something else with their accordions and a trumpet and all dressed up like they were ready to chase Boy Scouts into the woods in Bohemia, if you know what I mean. I know you're cracking up by this time. The Slavonic Josephus translated from the Aramaic into Slavonic, or the Slavonic dances, you know. Dun, 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 dun. Sorry. I'm just not coming up with a comedy tonight. Sometimes I just can't do that. You can't expect it of me every time. That's all I'm saying. If you don't like it, then just get out of here. Shouldn't I care? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding, all right? I had something that set me off. Something set me off today really bad, and that was I ate a Jamaican meat patty. Meat, as dough and something in there. I think it was Rival. Or soaked up kibbles and bits. Okay. All right. Where's the rabbit? You know, did you lose the rabbit?
Yes, I did.
The
No
rabbit
tablet
is
anymore,
lost.
so I can't get the bunny rabbit out.
Lee is really at wit's end because his tablet's busted.
Computers in storage.
What are we going to do? We don't have an office here. We're in my little bedroom again. Can you believe that? There's somebody. Yeah, there's Lee waving in the background. There. Why go right there? Is waving his hand to you, Brother Lee.
All right.
All right. And there is Ben Regesh, Dwayne Dennis. That Dwayne, I hope I see you sometime again. I got a great idea for the next boot camp we do. Boxing matches.
Well, I was going to show up, but I don't think I will now.
Well, no, you're not going to have to worry because it's the men against the women.
Oh, okay.
Okay. This gives an opportunity for the men to really slap around some of these women where they couldn't normally do that. Put on the gloves and everything's legal then, except kicking. You can't do that. Okay, Dwayne. Aramaic Josephus tells us a lot about our boys in the first century. You might want to go out there and take a look at that text. I retranslated it for you using the Slavonic. Yes, I can hardly read it, but there are notes, so we can look into the translation notes and see what we can do. I'll be having a different translation than you as I go through this. So that's a story behind the Slavonic. I think that it's the Aramaic wars translated by Methodius and Kirill, saints now in the Orthodox churches, from which we get the Cyrillic alphabet and the Russian language, and the native language of Bogdan Shrumkov, of course, Ukrainian. Now, we're going to start with what he wore, John the Baptist wore, and what he ate, because this plays right into John the Baptist of the Dead Sea Scrolls sect, and perhaps a teacher of righteousness, or the teacher of righteousness, as John the Baptist. Now, we've looked before at teachers of righteousness being Yeshua or James the Just, or we go back to first century BC, and we've got Judah the priest, perhaps one, or we've got Onias the fourth. We've gone through all those. Now, this is one where we're actually going to put the onus on John the Baptist for a change. It doesn't tell us much about what he ate or where in the Gospels, but there's a little bit there. It says that he wore a raiment or a garment of camel's hair and a leather girdle around his waist. I'm thinking about my mother years and years ago, who never went without her girdle. So I understand why she was such a mighty woman of God, because of that girdle. But hers wasn't made of leather. I think it was Playtex, something like that. Now, garment of camel's hair, leather girdle. His food was locusts and wild honey. In the Aramaic New Testament, it's not locust, it's carob, or some associated plant food. Carob, and wild honey, but locust is certainly a possibility if locusts were considered to be vegetarian fare. So I'll read just a little bit from my little version here of the Slavonic Josephus concerning John the Baptist, what he ate, what he wore. Now, at that time, there walked among the Jews a man in wondrous garb, for he had stuck on his body animal's hair, wherever it was not covered by his own hair. But in countenance, he was like a savage. You might want to look that up in Greek. That's therion. It means a wild man, like the fellow that was in the cave of the Gadarenes and came out. One version of the gospel says there was one named Legion. The other says Matthew always has two of everything. Yeah?
Well, the camel's hair that John the Baptist was wearing. Now, camels are not clean. So why would he wear camel's hair?
I'm getting to that.
Oh, you are?
You're always ahead of everything.
So, okay.
I got to get a drink of water. I'm already dry.
All right.
Hold on. Can you entertain for a minute? Tell them all the troubles you've been through this year.
Oh, boy. Well, I'm trying to put together another greenhouse, and it's been very hot. We've had, today it felt like 100 degrees. Humidity, I think this morning was 95% humidity. And we've had a temperature of like 95 degrees. So it's been really rough this time. It's been dry. We haven't had any rain the last few days. So this is what I'm dealing with. And trying to figure out what we're going to do for Sukkot. And we're going to be sending out a registration. That's quite involved, I hear. And Jackson's had a time here with a friend of his coming from out of town. And so he's had that going on. And so we've been bouncing around with the Yahad, with the stuff here, working out of this 10 by 10 cubicle. Not complaining, glad we have a roof over our head. But no, we're looking at, we have tents and everything out in Hole and Wall in Tennessee that we're trying to get back so we can use again. We don't know how to get them back and back and forth. And so these are challenges that we have going on at the Yahad. Not the stuff that you hear all the time, but kind of logistics that go on here. And I'm sure everybody has their own challenges where they are. And it's been a challenge, and we keep going through challenges too. But we'll make it through. We'll make it through. What's the alternative? He should be back soon. I think he's walking this way now.
There he is. My catheter. Okay, I got something to drink here. Sorry, we're belaboring this tonight. I had a week off, Had a very enjoyable time. My friend from college, didn't know existed anymore, 33 years ago, came to visit. Hadn't seen her for 33 years, except I did see her up in North Carolina. We had a good time this week, going over all the old stuff at Indiana University. What are you laughing about, Carrie Weigel? Give me a break, Either listen to this or get out of here. Oh, they're probably going to get out.
You think? No. They're laughing at you, not to you. I mean, what?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let us continue. Let's see if the conference center is still going, or we lost them, or what. There's a few people on there now.
They're laughing at my
Jan Bast is on. Oh, yes, they are.
What? What'd they say?
You are heard. I think that means something like, I feel your pain.
Well, 95% humidity here.
95% humidity. No wonder you took a week off. For sure. Hey, I did cuddle a little bit, but it wasn't I'm a pastoral minister. I can't do much. I look healthy. Doggone right. Well, I did go to the doctor today, and he said, Jack, your disease has advanced to the level where you can no longer do this. But I ain't going to tell you what. You'll have to just imagine that. It was good news. The pressure's off now. And when he was brought to Archelaus was the oldest surviving son of Herod the Great. He was a despot. He was a bad boy. Archelaus, who came to power when Herod died in 4 BC, lasted till 6 AD, which is a key date, 6 AD. Key date. Does anybody know why? Archelaus goes from 4 BC, the death of his father, till 6 AD, and he's deposed by the Romans for being too cruel. What happened in 6 AD? Leave that till later. When he, that is, John the Baptist, was brought to Archelaus, and the learned doctors of the law had assembled, they asked him who he was and where he had been until then. Well, that's a good question we should ask, because Archelaus was out of there in 6 AD. Click, 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 click. 6 AD? How old would he have been? Well, if he's 6 months older than Jesus, and Jesus is born in 4 BC, then John the Baptist is 9 years old. That's really something. He's brought to Archelaus when he's 9 years old. What about that? He's a wild man. He's got hair all over him, and he's only 9 years old. Oh, well, we'll find out more about that later. They asked him who he was and where he had been until then, and he answered and said, I am Enosh. Enosh, Aramaic for man, as in son of man, or Enosh was a historical personage in the Bible. He says, I am Enosh. As such has the Spirit of Elohim called me to be, and I live on bulrushes and roots and tree food. Bulrushes, we know they're edible. I'm thinking cattails. I looked it up in my edible plant book here in Florida. You know you can eat cattails. You can even eat the cattail. Think of that. I'm not talking about a feline here. I'm talking about these kind of reeds that grow up in a ditch alongside the road. Know that they blow little seeds all over. So he ate those things and roots and tree food. Now, his nature was strange, and his ways were not human, says Josephus in the Slavonic version. For even as a fleshless spirit, so lived this man. Every word in this testimony is significant. His mouth knew no bread, nor even on the Passover feast did he taste of unleavened bread, saying, in remembrance of Elohim, who redeemed the people from bondage, and this given to eat. Is this given to eat? I'm sorry. And for the flight only, since the journey was in haste. Strange reason not to eat bread, not even unleavened bread. But wine and strong drink he would not so much as allow to be brought nigh him, and he loathed to eat any animal. And every act of injustice he exposed, and tree food served his needs, or alternatively, tree fruits, plural. What the Baptist really wore and ate, it can be determined by his reply to the captors during Archelaus' rule. I am Enosh. I am a man. The Baptist regards himself as, we might say, the reborn antediluvian Enosh. Now, whose son was Enosh? As Enosh, he practices the original diet ordained by Elohim for men, mankind, humankind, before the fall. The antediluvian diet, of course, was a vegetarian diet. It changed after the fall, if you read carefully. Josephus also mentions an individual in the Greek version called Banus or Banya. Banya is a derivative of the word to baptize. So what we're getting here is either the man's name was Banya or he was known as the Baptist, the Banya, who dwelt in the wilderness, wearing only such clothing as trees provided, feeding on such things as grew of themselves, and I'm quoting, and using frequent ablutions, I guess that's baths, of cold water by day and night for purity's sake. And we can see a lot of Qumran right in there with the ablutions and the purity regulations. Josephus says, I became devoted to Banya, to this baptizer, this wild man, this Therion. Josephus tried out for his group. He didn't make it. But he was acquainted with him when he was a teenager, at about 17 years of age. That was the age that young men, especially of that time, acquired their education. This is why we find down in Bethabara, in the New Testament, we find Philip and Nathaniel and Andrew and Kepha down there. Around the Baptist, they're 17 perhaps. They have some money and they're going to go find their teacher so they can get a higher education for 3 years. This is why we hear about the 17-year-old coming into the Qumran institution for 3 years. 3 years of discipleship, 3 years of possible death, because if he's put out of the program, he goes out in the desert to die. So at 17, usually they would go out and take their money they had saved, or their monies their parents had given them and saved up in order for them to get an education, and they would hire a teacher. Note, in Bethabara, where John was baptizing, this is outside of Israel, to the east. Yeshua does not accept invitations to become a teacher. He picks them out. Many are called, few chosen. Few choose, few chosen. It can be either way in the Greek language. There's no distinction. He chooses his disciples. That's very unusual for a teacher to do that. Otherwise, they would take as many disciples as they could at the highest pay they could get. He just says, follow me. And then they follow him on foot, first to Nazareth, then up to Cana for the wedding. Now I'm getting off subject. I'm thinking that maybe John and Banya are the same person. Now, Josephus, I think that he's born in the 30s. So if he's 17, we're talking about, again, outside of the lifespan that we get in the New Testament for the Baptist. We're getting an idea that John the Baptist is somewhere around, well, he has to be older than 30 because he can't do what he's doing when he's less than 30, because he can't be an elder in any association in Israel until he's attained that age. So he's got to be over 30. But here we have reports of him in 6 AD being hauled before the authorities. And probably here, what Josephus is saying is the Baptist, not Banya as a proper name. Josephus is having an personal relationship with either John the Baptist or his successor. He speaks of them in the same context exactly, and because the translators translate Banya as a proper name, we lose the idea that he is saying the baptizer. We wonder if John's diet might have corresponded to that same diet that Banus or Banya, that Josephus spoke about, used for a number of years. That is, things that grew of themselves. Fruit, figs, nuts, roots, raw plants, etc. This would correspond directly with the raw food kind of vegetarian, that cooking and processing is not used in the preparation of these foods. The statement in that Slavonic version that I gave you of the war, that John didn't eat bread or drink wine or strong drink, that can be explained by raw food vegetarianism, since they were not food and drink that grew of themselves. However, eating locusts, as is mentioned in the New Testament, would certainly contradict the dietary practices of a vegetarian. If it wasn't for the fact that locusts can be explained as the points or shoots of some plants, which I mentioned a little bit ago, the carob plant, for one, translates directly to locusts here. So it could well be talking about the shoots of the locust plant. But a raw vegetarian diet doesn't agree with certain statements found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were not vegetarians necessarily. The Damascus document, or the siglum is CD, Cairo, Damascus, which I also gave you a copy of the exhortation from that, allows for the eating of locusts as long as they're either cooked alive or they're drowned. CD, Damascus documents, a rule of the community and the story of them coming into the wilderness and what happened to them. According to the same scroll, this wild honey of the Gospels would have had to have been filtered because it would have had insects in it. Even fish that had been split with the blood poured out for a vegetarian at that time in the Qumran community could be eaten. The focus is on the blood, of course. And we read about the splitting of the fish and the pouring of them out, or doing that right in the river or sea, and them being eaten right there, just like it tells us that Joshua did at the end of John on the seashore. It also conflicts with the other rules that mention the eating of bread and wine, especially in the Messianic banquet, you might remember. There is a portion attached to the war scroll that they finally took away. They call it the Messianic scroll or the Messianic banquet, where you find the coming together of all the covenanters in the land of Damascus, and they're sitting in the rows in the order of their esteem, and they've got the Messiah there and the priests, and they've ordered up bread and wine. And that document says even the Messiah can't touch the bread or wine until the priest has blessed it. If the priest does not bless the bread first, there cannot be no eating of bread and wine. But the implication here is this is the gathering of the community when Messiah is present, and that when he is present with the priest, they divvy up bread and wine. And this wine in Qumran, it appears to be unleavened wine or unfermented wine. It appears to be raw grape juice preserved in some way. It's interesting that this wine may have been only unfermented because of the Nazarite vow that the Qumranites used periodically. But even raw grape juice had to be prepared and filtered to get the insects out of it. One possible explanation why there's a little contradiction here is that while John is baptizing in the Jordan River, he wouldn't have been able to enter the sect itself into, again, the holy meals because he was hobnobbing with the perverse. This was not allowed in the Qumran community. You didn't go outside and then come back in unless you performed ablutions again and made certain vows, shaved your head, burned your clothes, etc. Once you had been hobnobbing or congregating with perverse people. And we get in the Gospels, who is John with? Very perverse people. Pharisees, These were the sworn enemies to the death of the Qumran Covenanters as well as the Nazarenes. We get a real good taste of this in Matthew chapter 23, especially when it's correctly translated, saying, "Damn you, Pharisees, actors. Damn you." Not just woe to you. He speaks very directly to the Pharisees. We understand all through the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have an enemy in there that is indicative of the Pharisees, those that seek the smooth thing, seek the smooth way. If you read through that exhortation in the Damascus document, you'll see those people, they seek the smooth way, and you think that a Pharisee is going to try to find the hardest way to go, but look, the Pharisees were the ones who colluded with the Romans. They colluded with the Romans on the condition that the Romans would allow them to have Javnia, a little town outside Jerusalem, to set up a rabbinical school. And so they are known throughout the scrolls as being collaborators, quislings with not only Rome, but also Greece. Now, you know, today, the rabbinic schools of that day that came about by the collusion with the enemy are the foreparent of today's rabbinical schools. Most Jews don't know their own history. They don't know what they go back to. They're not told this. They're told that this oral Torah, this Mishnah, is the very word of Elohim, just as potent or more so than the commandments found in the written Torah. And one of the indications in Mishnaic writings is that we don't question this, and we don't go back on our ancestry and look, and we certainly never read books like Enoch or Ezekiel, or read about watchers or jubilees. These are off the book list. And that's the reason why we don't have them in the canon, because the Pharisaical rabbinical movement has kept the text of our Old Testament, the Hebrew text, captive for 2,000 years now. Jews and Christians alike don't know that there is anything else. They don't know the 200 years of collusion between the Pharisees and the outside forces that are known in the Dead Sea Scroll as the Kettim. And then again, I'll say one more thing about it. Where did they get their name? Well, Judaism tells us that Pharisee means those set apart. It means nothing like that. Pharisee comes from Farsi, Parthians, Persians. These people and their religious ways from Persia and Babylon come into Israel at about 240 BC as foreigners. And by the 1st century BC, they've taken over the temple. They've not only gotten the Zadokite priesthood kicked out, but even the usurping priesthood kicked out. And in the reign of Alexandra Jannaeus, I'm talking about maybe 70 BC, we've got the Pharisees in telling the puppet priests what to do. And it was like that throughout the rest of the New Testament era. In fact, Josephus himself, born to riches, born into a rich Sadducean family, himself going to be able to inherit the high priesthood when he got older. He says himself, I'm a priest, but I follow the way of the Pharisees. This gives us a good idea why, when he's captured at Yotapata in the Galilee, when he's captured hiding out in a sewer by Vespasian, when he finally has to give himself up, he goes with the Romans. I think he was right to do that, but after that, he was a hunted man the rest of his life. He could never go back to Israel. He had to go to Rome, where he became a very rich man and spent the rest of his days in the palaces of the Flavians. In fact, he takes their name, Flavius Josephus. He is the adopted son of the Emperor Vespasian after the Jewish War. That is his reward for colluding. Next, we're told that John the Baptist is out there at Bethbara, baptizing in a lonely place, all by himself. He's apart from the Qumran sect about 10 miles. He had to be in part of that sect, but they could come and go as long as when they came back in, they went through the purity rituals that they had to do to come back into the community. Now, we're looking at John the Baptist as the teacher of righteousness. So this is something that he would have to come back in and complete purity to go back into the leadership of the Qumran community. The people who came to John for baptism brought him bread and wine as a gift, certainly. What would be his reason for refusing to accept such gifts? If the explanation that I've already said is correct, he must have refused such. If the statements in the Slavonic Josephus are correct, of course, we could offer the explanation that these occasions of gift giving were rare and the gifts were maybe hidden from view of the large crowd, but this would hang the above explanation on a slender thread. There must have been another reason for John's abstinence from bread and wine. Back to the Messianic banquet. The evidence we find there is that the teacher was required to eat of the bread and partake of the wine once it had been blessed by the priest. And also the meal that was given by the sect every single day, of which the food was called holy, the kadosh food, we don't know what it consisted of. No idea. Josephus says they get one portion of one kind of food, generic, and one loaf of bread. He says they don't get very much, but they only get enough to satisfy their needs. So there must have been another reason for his abstinence. It tells us in the Damascus document, again, that wherever 10 men were together, there was a minyan, and they could have the meal of the holy food then, and the bread and wine. That's when it was consumed. They couldn't be consumed unless there were at least 10, and there was a priest involved to make a blessing over it. The scroll says, when Adonai will have begotten the Messiah among them. That's a funny word. Were they waiting for a Messiah? Where does this word begotten come from? We have a word exactly like it in the New Testament, homogeneous. Homogeneous means only begotten. Genos just means begotten or born. And we have the beginning of a Messiah spoken of in the CD. The high priest then was certainly required to preside over the banquet with the Messiah of Israel. And the entire council of the community would come together for bread and wine. Could it be the case that just John avoided the wine and the bread until Messiah would come, until Messiah was begotten within the community, until Messiah was anointed and he could preside over the special meal with the entire assembly? Now that's a possibility. This is kind of in depth here, but it's going into something later on. Where's my time? We know that the Nazirite vow, I think is that in Judges 6? The person that was undertaking the vow consumed nothing from the grapevine. Certainly that included wine. Also, according to that passage, no razor shall come upon the participant's head, excuse me, and he shall let the locks of his hair, of his head, grow long. These are not incompatible with the description of the life of those at Qumran. It talks about not only the Qumranites keeping the Nazirite vow, but also John is certainly keeping a Nazirite vow here as well. I think probably if he was keeping a Nazirite vow, what other reason would it be for, except he was awaiting Messiah to eat bread, drink wine at the table with Messiah and the entire assembly. And there's a good bit of evidence for this. Excuse me, a little catch in my throat. I want to share a little something from you from ecclesiastical history, Eusebius's work, and he takes it from several sources, but it has to do with James the Just, and also from the Gospel of Hebrews, we find the same thing regarding the eating of bread and wine and the abstaining from it until Messiah comes. Look. All right, I'm finding the quote here. James, Yaakov, that's James the Just, had sworn not to eat bread from the time that he drank from the Master's cup, speaking of the communion that we read about in the Gospels, until he would see Yahshua raised from among those who sleep, that is, the dead. After the resurrection, then, this passage concludes by stating that Yahshua took bread, he blessed it, broke it, and gave it to James, and listen to this. He said to him, and this is a little touching, I think, my brother, eat your bread, for the Son of Man has been raised from among those who sleep. The sole value of this passage is to show us that there were some that took this vow of not eating or drinking from the table of the holy until Messiah was to be raised from the dead. And perhaps in Josephus' mind, John the Baptist was not killed in the life of Yeshua. He survived Yeshua, at least on until at least 37 AD. And if Banya is John the Baptist, much later than that. He survived. So we got a kind of a conflict here. In one version, John the Baptist survives. In another version, Josephus talks about his death. Could both versions be right? Could one be hiding something from the other? Did he write something in Aramaic that he didn't want to disclose to the Greeks? Quite possibly. So John, as the reborn Enosh, who's the son of Seth and the grandson of Adam, he wore the garb of Adam's descendants. After their fall from paradise, it tells us that Elohim made garments of skins for Adam and Eve. Now, this word skins is a problem. Would Elohim, who just commanded Adam and Eve, Hava, to eat a vegetarian diet, go and kill animals and make skins or clothing for Adam and Eve? A vegetarian diet would essentially mean that this would not be the case. It would be hard to accept that animals, such as garments of skins, would be used for this purpose. More likely that garments of hairs of skins would be used for this purpose, such as are made from camel's hair collected often from the bark of trees, where John the Baptist gets everything else he wants to eat, and perhaps even eggs, bird's nest soup. Did not require the killing of animals. So it would appear that John agreed with them. That is, the antediluvian ancestors of our faith. He had stuck onto his body animal's hair, according to the Slavonic Aramaic Josephus, wherever it was not covered by his own. But this is not set out to praise him, because Josephus calls him a savage, a wild man, inhuman, and he lived as a fleshless spirit. So strange. A little piece out of the Gospel of John that's been pulled out and put into a non-canonical gospel. He says when Thomas doubts him and he says, "Put your finger in my side," it has Yahshua there saying, "And see that I am not a bodiless spirit." Exactly what it says here about John the Baptist. They supposed he was a fleshless spirit. And Paul supposed he's a fleshless spirit. But Yeshua, or whoever's writing on Yeshua's behalf, puts in here a special indictment of those who would say that his resurrection was spiritual. He's saying, I was raised in the body. So now we have a teaching that is in contradiction again, both in the New Testament, where in the Gospels he's raised bodily, in Paul he's raised spiritually, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Aramaic Josephus. What I'm saying here, there's got to be a connection. What it is, I don't know. There's got to be a connection between these. They're all written at the same time about the same people, and they're named. I think about Luke writing in the 90s, late 90s. A woolly Elijah. Oh, maybe he found one of those frozen mammoths. Josephus tells us about Banya, the same thing, that he wore only clothes the trees provided. What was also made from trees at that time were carpets, saddlebags, kitchen equipment, made out of the bark or the leaves. In the springtime, camel's hair would also fall off. Did you ever smell a camel? It would seem that, well, let's put it this way. I think I'd rather wear the skins than the hair. However, the skins would have been unclean for him. The leather belt, maybe to identify him as well with Elijah, who wore a garment of haircloth with a girdle of leather about his loins. Okay, I'm coming to the end and the big finale. Were the Qumranites, were the Essenes vegetarians? Were their purity regulations such as they couldn't touch the bodies of dead animals? Were they not permitted, except when taking a vow, from eating meat? This is not really the baseline of what I'm trying to talk about, but it is significant for our time when there's so much crosstalk in our movement about vegetarianism versus meat eating. The cruelty of meat eating, the sinfulness of meat eating, for instance, and the holy way of eating vegetarian or rawest, like Paul Nissen. Well, look, I kind of figured, what are these scrolls made out of? What is parchment? What is vellum? Aren't they specially cured animal skins? Would these not be unclean for them to pick up? Where did the meat go? Now, some of the parchments may have been hundreds of years old. Some have been carbon dated to 200 BC, a little even earlier than that. You know, skins that were prepared for writing could be sitting in the cave or warehouse for 100 years before they were used. And the palimpsest was when a scroll made out of parchment was used, and then the writing was scraped off and something else was put over that. Another reason why John might refuse to eat meat, on the other hand, is not for ritual purposes, but rather because of the temple priesthood that was in Jerusalem at the time, was a usurping foul priesthood. It was not of the house of Zadok. They were not even religious people in there, the house of Annas. They were secular people bound and determined to use their power to make money. So they could have motorhomes and big houses, so they could have slaves. You might have heard of some of these fellows like Nacdemon living at that time. I told you about Nacdemon. We have him in the New Testament. He's called Nicodemus there. Nicodemus is a great Greek name. It means people beater. People beater. Demos, people. Nico, beater. There was a guy named Nacdemon. Sound familiar? Nacdemon the Pharisee was a very rich man. He was part of the temple crowd, and he had his part in the priesthood even as a Pharisee. He was so rich and so proud of himself that he was in the Mishnah spoken of as wearing 6-foot-long tzitzim. 4 of them on his garment, much plus every other fancy accoutrement of the day. He had his 12 disciples, and when he would go any place, 3 of those disciples on each tzitzim, holding it up, so they wouldn't touch the ground. That's nothing, though. It's Nacdemon. The daughter of Nacdemon was even a little more frugal. When she walked out, her servants had to bring a cart along. In that cart was full of new pillows. Every step she would take, a new pillow would go under the foot. Her father's disciples saw to that. Then when she took another step, the pillow was taken up and given to the poor. Each pillow, once it was used, once was given to the poor. Oh, that's a mitzvah. Is it not? Giving pillows to the poor, used only once to step on of a princess. Princess stepping. No, that might have been the woman that Paul was trying to marry.
Could be. That'd be like when you go to the toilet, you have a roll of $100 bills, and when you wipe your butt, you basically throw it away, right? I mean, it would be the same thing, wouldn't it? Her feet would have to be walking in the dung of the animals, so it was dirty, and then she would give it to the people.
Well, you know, when we were going through, where was it? I was in a car. And this last little trip, Atlanta. Obama's motorcade was on the interstate coming the other way. I asked the driver, I was in a van coming from the airport. He said, there it comes. And motorcade, gobs of motorcycles, one black limo after the other. Of course, I knew which one our president was in. I know you've heard this before. It was the one where the window was open and he was throwing nickels out. As he was, you know, this is happening all over the world now. It's called helicopter economics. The latest economic theory, I'll get back to Obama in a minute. Latest economic theory is that if you take a helicopter one time, a helicopter full of money, one time, up into the air, go to a populated area, and drop all that money out from a high plateau. Drop it all out so it flutters down and everybody knows about it. If you do it one time, a major economist says that will fix the economy. There'll be such, I'm serious, there will be such a commotion about this that the economy, because of that, will come back alive. Interest rates will go up. It will affect the entire world. I just heard this whole theory yesterday on the radio. Astounding. I got the guy to turn off the side of the interstate. I wanted to see what was happening there. By golly, those were nickels, but they were wooden nickels. Now, did you ever see that movie back in the 70s called The Magic Christian? You know the theme song. If you want it, here it is, and get it. I had to read that book, The Magic Christian. It's worth reading because evidently this theory of helicopter and the idea that Nakdamon and his daughter and some others to fix the economy while looking like a very generous person. There is a multimillionaire in The Magic Christian. I can't remember much of it, but I remember this. In Chicago, he was able to use his money and influence to cordon off a block of Chicago. And he announced an event for all Chicagoans. What he did was he took a gigantic vat. In that vat, he had gallons and gallons of manure and sewage put in that thing. And then he set fires under it till it was all hot and steamy and smoking. He had a huge crowd around. The grand finale was to dump in hundreds of $100 bills and then watch the people climb the ladders and jump in to get their share. That sounds like in 2008, Obama money. Remember that? Where are you going to get that stuff, lady? Obama going to give it to me. Obama going to give me the money to do that. Obama got the money. I know he's going to tell the truth, and he's got the money. I don't want to disparage Obama. That's not my idea. I'm talking about economics. At this time, it was very similar to that time, except they had foreigners in their country keeping law and order. The country was ruled by bandits. You had to be packing, no matter where you went. All right, I'm off the subject, I know. I'm almost done. Boy, there was a lot of dry husks in this one. Noah. Oh, you know the Noahide covenant? The Noahide covenant? I would like to hear some comments about that. Is there such a thing? I never found any. 7 commandments. If you're a Gentile, you can come into Israel as long as you keep the Noahide covenant, never say the sacred name, never keep a Sabbath. Gotcha. I think you can do that. Anybody still over here in the conference center? Hooray for veganism. Whoa, I think veganism is a higher form of holiness. Definitely. Definitely. Let me see here. This little window popped out again. It is anti-Messiah. Kay says it's anti-Messiah. Jeffrey says, hooray for veganism. You're on 2 different conference centers. Doggone it, we could have a real argument. Oh, the Noahide laws. All right, yes. It's ridiculous. It is. Well, I got to finish this. Maybe I'll just read this paragraph because it's full. An interesting episode from the Old Testament times is worth bringing up here. After the waters of the flood had dried up, Noah offered animal sacrifices to Elohim that had a pleasing odor. That is, the sacrifices were offered in an acceptable manner. It was only as a consequence of this action that Elohim then gave permission to mankind to eat animal flesh. And the reference there, of course, is Genesis 8, verse 13 and following. Before the fall, Elohim, as we mentioned before, only gave humankind permission to eat a vegetarian diet, this according to Genesis 1:29. It could very well be the case that based on this Old Testament story, John chose to forego eating meat until such a time as a proper sacrifice was again offered in a purified temple by a righteous priesthood. Footnote, James the Just, the leader and high priest of the new covenant after John, appears to have agreed with John's views in this area, since Hegesippus states that he did not eat flesh. We'll also have to remember that it is reported to us by this same Nazarene disciple, Hegesippus, that it was James that went in on Yom Kippur into the Holy of Holies with the ephod and the turban kadosh Yahweh on his head and prayed and spoke the sacred name in the kadosh kadoshim for the sins of the people. And coming out, he was executed. This happening in 62 A.D. Of course, his Yom Kippur was different than theirs. He was on the same calendar I'm on right now. Yeah, he was on the same calendar I'm on. I'm happy to say so. Oh, look, we might be off a day, Ty. But what a difference a day makes, after all.
Over 2,000 years, it's up.
Yeah. To summarize, this comes from the book. I think it's likely that John, says Palumbo, the great preacher of repentance, believed himself to be the antediluvian Enosh, reborn, in whose time men began to call upon the name of Yahweh. There's the significance right there. Men began to call upon the name of Yahweh. They didn't in his time. They did not. He intended to practice the antediluvian diet and wear the antediluvian garb. Antediluvian means before the flood, I think. Until such time as the new covenant in the land of Damascus, where he was baptizing, finally gained control of the temple and could again offer sacrifices then that pleased Elohim. And of course, at this time, I have to remind you that the Dead Sea Scrolls have two alternatives for the outcome of the people of righteousness in the first century. You know that Yeshua, Paul, even Paul, James, everybody expected the end times to be immediately. And scholars tell us that they were wrong. They were wrong. What they expected didn't happen. The parousia, the presence, or the coming, second coming, didn't happen. But I would beg to differ with them. They haven't read the Revelation in context, because that was the second coming. And Josephus, he records the events of that time, the prodigies of that time. They were right. The end was coming. What the Qumran Essenes thought to do was to keep such a level of holiness. This is the reason why. This is the reason why they might be vegetarians, or they took Nazirite vows, or John the Baptist didn't eat anything but tree stuff. Because they expected that the angels would join them in an annihilation of all the perverse of Israel, and that the poor masses of Israel would join them, and that with the angelic help coming from the 7 temples above, joining them because of their holiness and their worship of angels, as Paul says, against the Qumranites, they would be able to go into this war and not only destroy the Kittim, but also all the perverse of Israel, including Jerusalem, the temple crowd, and everybody else that was not with them or didn't join them. That didn't happen. But you can find the whole plan in the war scroll. It's all in there. 7 battles. 7 battles to be fought. Plan B was we hide our history. We bury our history. We take our sacred books that we took originally from the temple in the 2nd century BC into the wilderness, and we are annihilated. So the last stand of the Qumranites was at Masada in 73. At Masada, their books were found, their ways were found, remnants were found. Not only that, but the pact that they wouldn't be taken alive, and the suicide pact that killed 900 and only left a couple women and children escape when the Romans got in there. They were not going to leave anything left to themselves. That was all that was left at that time. Josephus tells about these people when the Romans got hands on them. I read it again just the other day. He said these people were able to take torture like none others. They rebuked and laughed at their captors while they were being tormented and punished. And even in death, they wouldn't even speak a cry for mercy. That's how strong these guys were. They had, well, the wilderness camps were military camps. They trained for this, and they lost. And why did they lose? Because of the perverse brigands and bandits that were running the country, especially in Jerusalem. We think of all those poor Jews stuck behind the walls of Jerusalem. All the poor Jews were dead by the time the Romans got there. What was left were factions fighting each other, a civil war going on behind the walls of Jerusalem that destroyed the temple sanctity when the Holy of Holies is filled up full of corpses of the dead just a few years after James the Just went in there to make absolution for the people. 70 AD, Holy of Holies full of corpses. Corpses all over the altar. Yet the priests continued to sacrifice whatever they could. Foul animals, unclean animals, and humans themselves. Thousands were killed within the temple to make it desolate. This is what most people don't realize. What was going on in Jerusalem in 70 is a complete fulfillment of the revelation, with the exception of the spiritual things that are in the heavenlies that we can't understand from an earthly point of view. Okay, time's up. Yeah, it is. Well, that was a little painful for you and for me. But if we do this again on Friday, I want to get into the Damascus document. Please do look through that. There's a checklist. If you saw it, you want to do it, go through that, or have somebody in your home read it while another one goes through the checklist and checks the different terms off. And by the end of the exhortation, when you've read it, you will really get to know it, especially if you do that twice. You know, you want to know the Dead Sea Scrolls, do you? You just want to hear some dumbass like me talk about it. Now, find out. I got the tools for you to find out here for yourself. This is one thing you can do. If one can read, the other one check off, then switch. You'll have read just the exhortation part twice. Or On the other hand, I have this recorded, along with everything else I ever learned, including the poem, The Owl and the Pussycat. You can listen to that and check it off yourself. And then come back here. I got a chart for you. This blows my mind, but I'm not surprised. Palumbo, he's got a chart that shows in detail the Damascus document uncoded. For us who know the New Testament, he's got it uncoded. It's amazing. The only thing more amazing than I've seen of this is James, the Brother of Jesus, and the Dead Sea Scrolls by Robert Eisen, and this might even be more. This particular book is full of references and source material. Right here, references and source material. See, used. Even used, this thing was $20. But it's a real gem. So, got anything to say? Let me read a little bit here. We talked about the Noahide laws. After we were made weak in the flesh from the fall, I believe that it became advantageous to eat meat, to get all 9 essential fatty acids. When someone can put up a good argument how early men could get them everywhere on earth without worldwide and all-season grocery stores, I might go for vegan. Daniel's abomination. Guess what? That happened in the 2nd century BC. Daniel wasn't written in 500 BC. It was written about 165 BC. It's an apocalypse, not a prophecy. It details what was going on then, again, as an encrypted letter for people that understood, had a mind of wisdom for the symbolism in there to know what was going on, and not for people like you and me to know. They didn't have clean meat. It was all adulterous, and Yahweh intervened. From K. Redwine, recorded, what name? Well, you've already listened to it. If you're taking the course, you've listened to it. I'll be happy to give you a link. Go to jspresents.org. That's where you want to go. And put in, search for Damascus. Where can I get a copy of James the Just calendar? It's the same thing you have, only one day different. Oh, look, Rush is an expert on it. But Rush, I have to warn you, Carrie may turn you around. My gosh, I edited all those virgin birth audios. There's like 5 or 6 of them. I put one of them on. I got so many complaints, I didn't know what to do. I still got the other 4 or 5. I'm thinking, God, if I put these on here now, this is the end. I won't be popular anymore. I won't have any girlfriends. Nobody will fix me a plate at a boot camp. Nobody even come if I put that up. I'm going to have to put it up, but I'm going to have to, what they told me at Hebrew Nation Radio, if you got controversial stuff there, you put a warning up first. You put a warning up first. And I have done that. So I'm going to put it up. I'm going to put a warning on there. We say, if you got any gripes or complaints, here's who you call. Over here, we just have Jeffrey. Hooray for veganism, and I'm with you. I wish I could do it. Maybe I can. Maybe I can, but first I've got to quit eating raw meat and animals that aren't dead. Like, you know, when I was out on the farm, I would normally, we raised hogs out on the farm. I lived in Indiana 10 years, or that's all I do is raise hogs. And what we would normally do in the wintertime, because we couldn't afford much, we would just amputate the leg off the pig. and sew it back up. No refrigerator or anything needed there. You could do that with like a cow too, but it's hard to get them to hold still when you're doing that. And you need a very, very serious scalpel. All right. Thank you for coming tonight. I'll see you maybe Friday night, and we'll do the 3:33 on Saturday if you want to continue on this.
Thanks, Jack.
Welcome. Thank you, Jeff. Yahweh be with you all. And
Shalom.
Shalom. Good night. How do you turn this off? Oh, there it is.